Thank you. Hi, my name's Tami, and I'm an alcoholic. And I'm grateful to be here this morning. Heck, I'm grateful to be anywhere this morning sober, that's for sure, because it wasn't always the case. I certainly want to thank Jen and the committee for giving me the privilege to come and participate in my own sobriety, to participate with you. Certainly Gordy and Rick and Jenny carried the message to me already. And sometimes when you're invited to speak somewhere, you're like, okay, I'm going to go carry the message, right? And inevitably, anytime I come to one of these things, the message is carried to me, and I'm really grateful to all three of them for that. It's especially touching for me to be able to share a podium with my sponsor, Clancy, who you will all hear tonight, and to probably one of my greatest, women mentors, Sharon, because I grew up buying those. Back then it was tapes, and it was Sharon B back then. And you know, it's funny when you're a speaker in Alcoholics Anonymous, you share your personal life with a whole lot of strangers, and we think we know you. You know what I mean? So by the time I met Sharon, she was like my bestie, and I knew her, and I was going to grow up to be like Sharon, and she didn't even know my name. And the same, you know, with my sponsor Clancy. And I've had an opportunity more recently in my sobriety to be able to do this, and I'm not one that's ever gotten used to this. You know, I still feel like that first-year newcomer sitting in the front row looking up at these AA people. And if you're new in this room today, you're actually what this is about. And I'd like to welcome you to the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous and to the family groups of Al-Anon. And I certainly hope you find what I have found here, because what I found was nothing close to what I was looking for. Does that get a clap? All right, let's do it. Let's start that clapping now. I would be remiss also in not thanking my hostess. My hostess, it sounds like I own her, but our hostess for this afternoon, or this weekend, Laura, who promptly picked us up at the airport with a beautiful smile, and Mike, and most importantly, my husband, Patrick, as well. Patrick has 34 years of sobriety in his own right. I have 22 years, so we have 56 years of drinks undrunk in our home, and that makes for a much more peaceful existence than the past. And, you know, Patrick and I get to do this deal together. And you'll hear later in my story, I didn't drink away a 21-year marriage. I actually sobered away a 21-year marriage, because the same selfishness and self-centeredness that I walked through the doors in Alcoholics Anonymous with 22 years ago, I brought well into my sobriety. And the beginning of that marriage was all about me and my drinking, me and the police, me getting arrested, me and the courts. And then I came into sobriety, and it was about me and my sobriety, me and the girls I sponsor, me and speaking, me. And the same husband that I abandoned in drunkenness, I abandoned in sobriety. But through the grace of God and the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and that beautiful fourth step that doesn't say what was my part, it says where were we at fault? Where was I to blame? I was able to inventory the loss of that marriage, and I don't have to make those same mistakes with my current husband, Patrick. So when he speaks, I join him as often as I can. When I speak, he joins me. We get to do this deal together, and that's sure been a side benefit that I didn't expect when I came crawling in here 22 years ago. After drinking the only two things I was even remotely capable of loving up to that point in my life. I do not know the price you paid for your seat here today in Alcoholics Anonymous, but I am sad to say, and I will never be proud to share, that the price I paid for that seat, or for any seat in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, was I laid down my little 5-year-old son and my little 6-year-old daughter, and I drank away my 2 children, because a liquid called vodka, is this yours? Okay, I don't care, I'll take yours. I want everybody's drink. A liquid called vodka that looked no more or less innocuous than the water in this glass was so powerful over my mind. It was more powerful than the love a mother had for her own 2 children. It was more powerful than a maternal bond. So I am not a speaker that will have you rolling in the aisles, laughing on the floors, because my sponsor Clancy has taught me that my job, anytime I share in Alcoholics Anonymous, is to impress upon you newcomers the fatal nature of this spiritual malady that we call alcoholism, because I did not know what an alcoholic was, and I certainly did not know what alcoholism was. And again, are we happy, joyous, and free? You bet. Do we do some crazy, silly things in drunkenness and sobriety? And from what I'm understanding, you Al-Anons too, that we can laugh about? You bet, because there's so much healing in the laughter. But I hope today, my goal this morning is to impress upon you newer people that the fatal, futile attempts that I tried to beat this sucker on my own. And if there's anything you hear this morning, it's not my opinion. This is what the book says. No human power can relieve you of your alcoholism, but God can, and he will if you seek him. It does not say in the book that God should or that he might. It says he can and he will. But I did not know that I was suffering from a spiritual malady that required spiritual help. So I'm one of those stories that kept going to the medical model for a spiritual answer. And you know, as I was listening to our Al-Anon speaker this morning, it still amazes me that 15 years she lived with that drunken father, another 12 years with that drunken husband. That's 27 years she spent suffering the effects of alcoholism and had never heard of Alcoholics Anonymous or what an alcoholic was. And that's what our job is in Alcoholics Anonymous, to carry the message. I had my first drink when I was around 13, and I've come to understand after reading this book, Alcoholics Anonymous, that I have an abnormal reaction to alcohol, but I didn't understand that at 13. Heck, I don't even know what an alcoholic is. I'm described in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous as an alcoholic that is never mildly intoxicated. I'm always more or less insanely drunk. So I'm either sober or drunk. There's like no in between for me. I'm also, it is not described in the book, so I can only share my experience, but I am in what we call in AA vernacular, a puking blackout drinker. There has never been a time that I have not puked beverage alcohol. I do not like the taste of alcohol. I never liked the taste of alcohol. Toward the end of my drinking, I used to have to plug my nose and wrap my long blonde hair in a shower cap because the barf particles would bounce like off the toilet water and back up into my hair. That's how really physically, hideously allergic I am to alcohol. I am deathly allergic to alcohol. I drink solely for the effect. And toward the end, I'd have to wear this shower cap and plug my nose and just pray that that vodka would stay down long enough to heat up my chest and give me that ease and that comfort that they talk about in the book Alcoholics Anonymous, that is produced for an alcoholic when we drink that elixir of life. I'm also what we call a blackout drinker. And again, I can only share my experience. When I drink alcohol, I never know when it's going to happen, if it's going to happen, or how long it's going to happen. But I will have lapses of memory that I will do strange and incredible things that I would be absolutely mortified to do in a sober state of mind, only to feel that pitiful and that incomprehensible demoralization they talk about the next day when people would recite my antics under the influence of alcohol. But again, I don't understand blacking out and puking, which, by the way, are classic or diagnosable features of acute alcoholism, because I didn't know what an alcoholic was. Our stories disclose in a general way, so I'm not going to go into graphic detail, but I ran away from home at age 15, and this has absolutely nothing to do with my alcoholism, but I share about it because many well-meaning, and I really want to reiterate, many well-meaning healthcare professionals led me to believe it did. I had been put in 2 foster homes prior to the age of 15 because of the illicit nature that my biological father had with my sister and I. Let's just say if you were a girl and you had a budding teenage body, you certainly were not safe to live at home with my father. We had no family secrets. All the guidance counselors at my high school when I started in 10th grade knew about our family history. And I started to have some unexplained absences, and a guidance counselor called me in the 10th grade, and she asked me what was going on, and apparently my story did not match my parents' story. They sent child services out to my home. I was 15 years old, and they immediately removed my father from the home that afternoon, and I faced going into my 3rd foster home. My sister, who was a year older than I was exactly, had run away from home a year earlier. So at 15 years old, I faced going back into a foster home for the first time without my sister, and I was scared, and I did not want to go. I didn't want to face my dad. I didn't want all those child service people asking me all those questions. I certainly didn't want to go live in another strange home without my big sister. So I dropped out of high school and I ran away from home. Now, I know most alcoholics, school is not really a good proposition for us. The book tells us we're grandiose, we're childlike, we're undisciplined. We like instant gratification, so school isn't something that alcoholics migrate toward because it takes a whole lot of work over a long period of time with a lot of structure and a lot of discipline. However, I was one of those gooky alcoholics. I believe children, I'm an educator today. I'm actually a high school English teacher. And I find that students, you're going to really clap when you hear my story. I don't know how I got from there to here. Anyway, I'm a high school English teacher, and I noticed that children will escape traumatic or difficult childhoods in different ways, and for me it was always through books. Obviously, I'm an English teacher today. I just became an associate English professor, which is like hysterical to my family. And I love books and I love literature, and that's how I escaped that painful childhood. I also had a public park across the street where I lived, and the minute I got home from school, I'd do my homework, get out of school clothes, go over to that public park just to get out of the house. And at 9 years old, someone gave me a tennis racket, and there were 16 tennis courts. I picked up a racket, and a very famous, actually, tennis professional who had retired noticed my ability or my propensity toward tennis, and he took me on as a coach, and he coached me for free. And so I run away from home at 15, and he can't locate me, but now I'm winning tournaments. I'm ranked 23 in the state of California, so I'm very athletic and I'm very academic. In school, I was popular, I was a decent-looking kid, I was a great athlete, and I was a phenomenal student. So school was a really safe place to land. At home, it was courts, it was foster homes, it was police, it was a whole lot of people asking me a whole lot of questions, and so home was never a safe place to land. So I migrated toward the sports and the academics. Well, at 15, I ran away from home, and my tennis coach, his name was Dennis, quickly located me on a friend's couch. And he said, look, Tami, I've been coaching you since you were 9 years old. You've got a ranking in California. You have such a promising career in tennis that will get you out of this family and out of this home that you're having such a difficult time with. And he said, I have a condominium with an extra bedroom. Why don't you come and move in with me, and I will show up to you at court, and we will face your father in the courts together. So I moved in with Dennis. I was 15. He was 40. For obvious reasons, I was a very precocious, sexualized 15-year-old. Sadly to say, Dennis fell to the temptation, and I just became his live-in girlfriend at 15. And we never did go to those court dates. And I remained I was termed as I was a runaway, and I was a ward of the state because I was a runaway. My parents didn't bother looking for me. They were just glad I was gone and in what appeared to be a safe place. Dennis had 2 children from a previous marriage, and they would come on the weekends. By no means is alcohol any regular part of my life, but when I drink alcohol, I'm never mildly intoxicated. So one weekend, the kids come to visit. We're all laying out by the pool. Dennis and I are doing shooters of tequila. I call it tequila if you're an alcoholic of my type. I acted the fool in front of those kids. They go home and tell mom. And now at 15 years old, I have jeopardized Dennis's right to see his children, their right to spend the weekend with their father, his ex-wife's right to have a break in raising those kids, all because of a clear liquid. And I don't understand any of it, don't equate it at all, because I have no idea what an alcoholic is. Dennis doesn't know what to do with me, but he knew I was good enough to play on a varsity string at a local community college that his friend happened to be the coach of. And so he talks me into taking the GED exam, which is an exam where you take a battery of 5 tests, and if you pass each section in a certain subtest, it's equivalent to having a high school diploma. Well, I'm a great reader, I'm a good test taker, so 1 week after my 16th birthday, I'm sitting down taking this GED exam, not in an idea that originated in my head, but when you're a woman and you're dependent on a man, you'll do what the flavor of the month suggests. And so I take this test, and we receive notification in the mail probably like a month and a half later that I had indeed passed this GED exam. Dennis didn't even waste 10 minutes in putting me in the car, running me down to this local community college. He had me try out for his friend's tennis team. I was able to make the number 2 position on the varsity string. He walked me over to admissions and records, and he immediately signed me up for 12 units with the hope that I'm traveling every weekend with that tennis team, and I'm in school all day so I don't cause problems with his ex-wife and his kids, and he can get custody of his children back. Now, I went into what they describe in Alcoholics Anonymous, the book, as a swearing off period. And when I was new in Alcoholics Anonymous, I'd sit in the back of the rooms and listen for the differences. And, I know this is going to come as a huge surprise to so many of you, but alcoholics really do tend to embellish and exaggerate their stories. And so I'd sit in the back of the room, and I'd hear people say things like, I drank 24/7, didn't draw a sober breath for 10 years before coming into AA. And when I drink, I don't stop until I pass out, black out, comatose, or the police. And so I would always sit in the back of your rooms and say, then you know what, I'm definitely not an alcoholic. And it wasn't until these old timers like Clancy and Sharon got my nose in this book. And do you know what it says? It says we have brief intervals of recovery, followed always by yet a worse relapse. It goes on to say that many of us do swear off alcohol, and we can stop. Some of us even with a solemn oath. And that was my story, but at 16 years old, I don't have enough of a history with my alcoholism to see that pattern that definitely develops in my life later on. So I swear off alcohol with a solemn oath, I'm never going to drink again, and I'm constantly reinventing myself. Can't speak for you men, but I sponsor several women, and we're always doing Kabbalah and yoga and cleanses and always trying to reinvent ourselves, always trying to change those little outsides to temper those crazy, crazy little insides that tend to, start to live inside of us, that spiritual malcontent. So I'm always cleaning up the outsides. For the next 2 years, I swear off alcohol. It has now jeopardized my living situation. So I swear off alcohol with a solemn oath. I'm never going to drink again, especially tequila. And I do that about face. And I go and I want brown rice and yogurt and kashi for breakfast, and I go to a local beauty supply and I buy expensive emollients and conditioners for my hair, and I'm going to become athletic, academic Tami. The next 2 years, I was on the dean's list all 4 semesters. I took 12 units. I shaved my legs. I painted my toenails. I conditioned my hair. I worked out. I ate brown rice and yogurt and kashi for breakfast. I could not get a B. I had to get straight A's because that's the kind of rigidity and the discipline and the structure I have to impose upon myself just to not pick up a drink. 2 times from 16 to 18, only 2 times, I picked up a drink. And both times, I ended up in a lockdown facility. Never once for the diagnosis of alcoholism. Both times I was picked up for public drunkenness. When you're a ward of the state and you're a runaway and you get arrested for public drunkenness, and I'm underage, they put me in a lockdown facility. And those doctors immediately, I walk in the lockdown facility, and the big elephant in the room is she's drunk out of her mind. But the minute they read my history with my dad, the diagnosis was mental and emotional disorders, trauma due to childhood, post-traumatic stress syndrome. And those doctors, rightfully, I guess, treated the symptoms of depression, anxiety, and insomnia. The problem is nothing ever got better because I'm going to a medical model for a spiritual malady, but I don't understand that. I'm 16 years old, 17 years old. I don't know that I'm suffering from alcoholism, and I guess neither did they. So at 18 years old, I graduate and I receive a Chancellor's Award where a few department heads pick some students that demonstrated some type of academic and or athletic excellence. And at 18 years old, that Chancellor's Award afforded me an opportunity to go to any one of 5 state universities in the state of California. I could pick which one. And for 2 more years, they would pay my tuition, my housing, my textbooks, and all my living costs. And all I had to do was play for their tennis team and take 12 units. And guess what I did, guys? Yeah, there's my alcoholic. I quit. I had been too good and too responsible and too disciplined for too long. I was exhausted. And so I dropped out of school, and I did that about face. I'd just been too good. I couldn't sustain it because that's that spiritual malady. I intuitively knew at 18 years old there was no way I was living this structure and this discipline that I could sustain that. I knew that intuitively, and I was just a kid. So I spent the next couple years doing what I happen to do very well that comes very easily to me, which is really crazy relationships and drinking. My drinking escalated. Back then, blonde hair, blue eyes, a great tennis player, worked real well down in the marina where I live in Southern California. So I had a whole lot of, wealthy men, and they wanted me to play tennis with them and took me all over. And, I'm living with Dennis, and we'd make up and we'd break up, and I'd cheat on him, and he'd take me back in that craziness that we live in when we're not sober. But at 21 years old, I got another public drunkenness charge. I was arrested. I got a DUI charge, and I was arrested and had to stay overnight in jail, and I had to face the courts. And so one more time, I swore off alcohol with a solemn oath. I'm never going to drink again. And I decided maybe the 12 units wasn't enough when I was younger. I'm going to go for 15 units this time. And the tennis career, I hadn't picked up a racket and played and trained like you need to become the top of the ring. And of course, as an alcoholic, my ego's too big not to be the best at something. So rather than just go back and play tennis, which I was very good at, I decided this time I'm going to become a triathlete. And I go down to the local health food store, and I want yogurt and brown rice for breakfast. And I'm training, and I'm swimming, and my body is a shrine, and I'm shaving my toenails and shaving my legs and painting my toenails, and brown rice and yogurt and kashi for breakfast. And one more time, always trying to change the outsides to temper those crazy, crazy little insides that are just really brewing inside of me. And I go through this, and as I'm during this period, I'm academic, athletic, outgoing Tami, and right next door, a condominium vacates next to the one Dennis and I are sharing, and this handsome guy moves in, and I notice he has a 10K shirt on, and he's a doctor, and he's good looking, and you know, let's be fair, ladies, we know when someone's checking us out, and he gave me a twinkle, and I gave him one back, and we kindle up this friendship, and I said, do you run 10Ks? And he said, yeah, I just got out of a 10-year marriage. Ding, 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 ding. And he said, and I'm new to the area, and I said, hey, I have a great athletic trainer, so I have him join my gym, and he and I start training in the mornings together, and then after school, he's an obstetrician, an OBGYN, and I'm taking a microbiology class, so we're laying out by the pool on Wednesday afternoons, and he's helping me with my homework, and you know, the fact I'm living next door with another guy, just an incidental, you know how we roll. We're such principled people, right? But poor old Rick met me in a swearing off period, and I was academic, outgoing, athletic Tami. But my brief intervals of recovery are not lasting as long. And one night, Dennis and I got into kamikazes, and it resulted in one of those knockdown, drag-out fights that became so loud and so violent that next-door neighbor, Rick, had to call the police to our unit. The police had no trouble finding our unit. They'd been there before. And I noticed Dennis is talking to the police, and that guy, that handsome doctor next door, Rick, is standing behind the police going, is Tami okay? Is Tami okay? And Dennis got rid of the police, got rid of that nosy neighbor, and then Dennis and I go upstairs, you know, and we do one of those all-night, you know, passionate makeups, the way we know how to do. We're beating the crap out of each other at 10 o'clock at night, talking about each other's mothers at 11 o'clock at night. You know, the police show up at 12 o'clock at night, and then 1 o'clock when the police are gone, it's like, oh, baby, you're my soulmate. I love you. Because we're so extreme and so dramatic. And we spend all night professing our love to each other like a bad Hallmark card. But I wake up the next morning and I do exactly what's described in the book Alcoholics Anonymous, that after a while, a drinking alcoholic cannot differentiate or separate the true from the false. That after a while, the only life we know is a drinking life. And I thought nothing the next morning of taking a little liquid makeup, covering up the black eye and the choke marks. And let's be fair, ladies, I beat the heck out of him too. That was not a one. They used to call me Tami Tyson when I drank because I'd throw a mean left punch. And I went off to Cal State University Northridge like there's nothing wrong with this picture. About 12 o'clock that afternoon, I'm in the underground parking of that condominium complex. Now, I have been drinking the night before, so I'm hungover. I had been beaten up the night before, so my whole body is sore. I stayed up all night professing our love with one of those dramatic makeups, so I haven't slept. I've been sitting in classes all day listening to lectures, and at 12 noon, my jaw is tight, my back is rigid, I'm tightly wound, I'm restless, I'm irritable, I'm discontent. And I get out of the car and I'm walking toward the underground parking to that elevator, and a thought occurs to me. Liquid relief is just moments away. A huge bottle of vodka is right in my condominium unit waiting for me. And one of our speakers, I believe it was Rick, shared about that last night. I'm walking toward the elevator. I haven't seen the alcohol. I haven't smelled the alcohol. I certainly haven't tasted the alcohol. Just thinking about a clear liquid, my jaw loosens up, my back starts to loosen, I'm lighter on my feet, and my entire perception changes just thinking about that alcohol. Because it does something for me that it doesn't do for other people. But I don't understand that because I don't know what an alcoholic is. And I get in the elevator and liquid relief's coming, and as I turn around to hit button number 3, that Dr. Rick is standing right at the elevator doors, and I'm like pushing the closed door button, and his hand wedges in. And prior to coming to Alcoholics Anonymous, I used to use a tremendous amount of foul language and a tremendous amount of inappropriate sexual behavior, sexual attire, and sexual humor. And through the grace of God, and ladies like Sharon, and gentlemen like Clancy, I learned how to clean up my language and my attire, but back then that's all I knew how to do, to keep especially you men a little bit like off your footing, so you'd never be able to look me in the eye and just have an adult conversation with me. So Rick comes in the elevator, and I pull out the tough cussing thing, and he said, Tami, you and I need to talk about what happened last night. And I'm like, you're effing know what happened last night. You're the one that effing called the cops on me last night, and I've been in effing school all day. day, and he just took his hands and he gently put them on my shoulders. And that really disarmed me. So I realized the tough cussing thing wasn't going to keep him off his game, so I pull out the seductress. And he was a doctor, and he had a beautiful suit on, and I just grabbed his Fossignol silk tie, and I pulled his neck right into my nose, took a deep whiff, and I said, God, your cologne, you always smell so amazing. And he just pushed me back, and he took my chin, and he jerked it up so I couldn't wiggle away, and he looked right down into my eyes, and he said, Tami, I've really come to care for you, and I have some very, very fond feelings for you. And he said, and I want to help you, but I don't know what's wrong with you. And man, that's the worst thing you can hear if you're an alcoholic suffering from alcoholism. Because since yay high, I had always known there was something wrong with me. I've had 10 years now of in and out of lockdown facilities and therapists telling me there's something wrong with me because of my childhood abuse. And now another human being is looking me in the eye and saying there's something wrong with me. And I have spent the last 23 years knowing there's something wrong with me and just trying to fake it till I make it so you guys can't see what I already know. Because alcohol has brought me to a point where I am constitutionally incapable of being honest with myself about the role that alcohol plays in my life, and more importantly, the role I'm playing in the lives of other people. And I got off the elevator that day, and I do believe it's the grace of God, and I went into Rick's condominium unit, and I told him the cry of every drinking alcoholic. I told him about my dad. I told him about the foster homes. I told him about the abuse. And I said, one day I'm going to finish my education, and one day when I finish my education, I'm going to get a job. And one day when I get a job, I'm not going to have to live with abusive men. And one day, and one day, and one day, because the cry of every drinking alcoholic is, look, I know my life looks a little whack, but I have a plan. And when my plan comes to fruition, it's all going to be okay. And newcomers, every alcoholic has a plan. Never a good plan. And I broke down and I cried that afternoon for the first time, like the broken little girl that I was and always had been. No more sexual seductive Tami. No more cussing Tami. I just sobbed like the broken kid that I always was. And he held me and I let him hold me. And then I went right next door to that condominium unit I shared with my boyfriend. I never did get that drink of vodka. But I remember going to sleep that night for the first time without a drink. I was exhausted. I woke up the next morning and I felt the fear they talk about in this book, Alcoholics Anonymous, that fear that comes in 100 different forms. And I got a glass and I poured that drink of vodka to assuage that fear. I plugged my nose, I downed it, it heated up my chest, it gave me that goofy feeling in my head. And then I came up with a drunken plan that morning. And in my drunken stupor, I said, you know, I've been with Dennis now for almost 8 years and things aren't going really well. That rich doctor surgeon next door has a huge crush on me. I have the key to his condominium unit because I take care of his exotic plants when he travels to medical conventions. And my plan that morning was to just take all my stuff out of Dennis's place, move it right next door into Rick's, get him between the sheets, and seduce the broken image I saw of me in his eyes the night before and replace it with Tami, the sexual goddess. So I spent the day moving, and where's my Al-Anons? Al-Anons, you'll get this, they won't. Not only when he came home did he find me, and there I was, all moved in, but 3 weeks later, he walked me down the aisle. And the day that Rick said I do, I know, the day that Rick said I do was the day he qualified for Al-Anon, because his life was never the same. I'm not going to go into all the devastating things, but that marriage produced 2 children. And today I have a son, Alex, that's 27, and I have a daughter, Chelsea, that's 28. And through the grace of God, I had a condition in my pregnancy called hyperemesis, where I could not stand the smell of perfume or coffee. I puked my whole 9 months with both my children. I could not stand the smell of alcohol. And I went the entire pregnancies, both of them, without picking up a drink. But I do want to share that I think it's important that I share this. I punished Rick for everything my father had ever done to me. And I punished Rick for a crime he never committed. And it was pre-Al-Anon for him. And sadly to say, he took the butt kicking. He did not have a program of recovery for himself. My ex-husband grew up in one of the most hideously violent alcoholic homes I've heard of in the 22 years that I've been here. He was so academically brilliant that at 12 years old, he made it to high school. At 16 years old, he made it to college. At 24 years old, he was in 20 years old, he was in medical school. And at 24 years old, he was an air flight surgeon in the Air Force in Vietnam War. And he was sewing our boys' bodies back as they were being medevaced off the field. And he survived that horrible childhood and that war, and yet just being married to me for a couple of months, he was stuttering and stammering. He didn't even know his own shadow, because I'm not a funny drunk. I hurt people when I drink. And I was a very damaged, hurt little girl, and his only crime was he loved me, and I could not tolerate that kind of love, so I had to destroy it. But that marriage produced 2 children, and at that point, my drinking really started to progress. They talk about it in the book, that women will cross a line beyond all recognition in a very short period of time. That certainly was the case for me. Not all women, but that was my story. And now I'm married to a surgeon. I don't work. I don't go to school. I have a 4,000 square foot home, 2 cars in the garage. You know, these 2 little children looking at me for something, and I am a completely crippled human being myself. And I felt the fear they talk about in this book, Alcoholics Anonymous. And one afternoon, I don't know why, and again, this is like the highlight of my drinking. In all honesty, newcomers, most of my drinking was very isolating and very pathetic and uneventful. But one day I wanted to get a tan, and I remember I have a 3-story house, and I'm in the middle layer deck looking down at the pool, and then I'm looking up at the 3rd roof, and I'm drunker than a skunk, all greased up with baby oil in my bikini. And for some reason, I think the roof is closer to the sun than the pool. So I get this long ladder, and I shimmy up the 3rd-story roof, and I lay out my towel in my bikini with my tumbler of vodka. And at this point, Rick's had to take the kids out to full-time daycare because he's coming home and finding a drunken wife taking care of his 2 small children. And he hires this poor woman to stay home and watch me and make sure I don't drink and drive. And he pulls into now he's an OBGYN, so he delivers babies all night long, and he's taking the kids to daycare in the morning and then bringing them back midday, again, not in Al-Anon, doing everything to enable me so I can just drink with impunity. And he comes home one afternoon, and the kids are about 3 and 4, and there's Mom, like on the roof, you know, wild and drunk, and I live in a cul-de-sac. And Chelsea's on one side, Alex is on the other, and Rick's in the middle, and all 3 of them are looking up at me at the roof, and I don't know why. I wasn't in a complete blackout because I remember it, but I walked to the low edge of the roof, of a 3rd-story roof, and I just jumped off the roof onto my husband. He's spinning with me on his head. The kids are screaming. The neighbors come out, and Rick really just reached up to grab me to get me off of him, and he had a metal watch, and it whacked me hard in the side of the eye. It sliced my eye. I started bleeding out of my eye. And I waited till the next morning to sober up, and I went to the local police division out where I live in Los Angeles, and I filed felony battery charges on my husband the next day with a sliced eye and a huge hematoma. They walked into a waiting room full of women patients that had been going to Rick for 18 years with an impeccable record as an OBGYN in our community, and they arrested him for felony battery charges, and it made the local papers in front of his staff and in front of his patients, and that was the only sober parent that Chelsea and Alex had. It was very shortly after he spent that night in jail that he met a group of people called Al-Anon. I am not an alcoholic that makes fun of Al-Anon. I am not an Al-Anon. I don't go to Al-Anon. But Al-Anon took away my greatest enabler and gave me a husband. But God, I hated you Al-Anons while I was drinking. And he goes to these meetings, and after about 6 weeks, he comes home and says, Tam, you can go to a hell in a handbasket if you want to, but you're not going to take the kids and I with you anymore. And I saw something in his eyes, and I knew those Al-Anons. One of them happened to be Clancy's beloved wife, Charlotte. Were giving him a backbone to stand up to the insanity of my alcoholism, and I felt the fear they talk about in this book. So I picked a fight with him. I got in my BMW. I went down to the liquor store. I bought a little 5th of vodka. I plugged my nose. I downed that vodka as much as I could tolerate. It heated up my chest. It lightened up that goofy feeling. I puked in a bag. I got up on the freeway, and the alcohol took effect, and I saw a call box on the side of the freeway and thought it was a payphone. And I said, I'm going to make a phone call. And man, I just plowed my car into that call box, and 30 days later, I'm standing in front of a woman judge. She's looking at my rap sheet. I've already had a felony DUI, 2 lockdowns. And she says, Tammy, your rich doctor husband isn't going to buy you out of jail time. You are going to serve some time on this. However, I'm going to waive 30 days of your sentence and put you in a lockdown facility. So I walk into now my 4th lockdown facility, and those doctors told me what they'd been telling me since I was 15 years old. Tami, you're clinically depressed from your childhood, and your drinking is just to self-medicate that pain. Later, when I came through the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous, old-timers like Patrick had a new name for the effect that alcohol appeared to have on me, as written word for word in this book, Alcoholics Anonymous. He suggested that I have an abnormal reaction to alcohol, and I may be an alcoholic. In that lockdown facility, those doctors told me, I used to tell them that I'd wake up in the morning out of a blackout, I'd go downstairs, I'd see broken children, broken glass, a broken husband, broken home, broken dreams. I'd just go back upstairs, turn the heating blanket up to Mom, suck my thumb and think of ways to kill myself. And when my daughter was 4, I took an entire bottle of antidepressants all at once, and then I got afraid that I was going to die. So I called 911, and I handed the phone to my 4-year-old to get the paramedics for her mother. And in the lockdown facility, they told me that the best hope for me is the right combination of medications for depression because of my childhood and probably some institutionalization for episodic depression. But none of those actions were my fault. Later, when I came to the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous, ladies like Sharon had a new name for a mother that attempted to take her life in front of her 4-year-old without giving a crap how it would affect that little girl. You called it alcoholism, selfishness, self-centeredness. The world revolved around Tammy's childhood. Forget Chelsea and Alex and their childhood. It's always about me. In that lockdown facility, I told those doctors that in my swearing off periods from alcohol, I'd take money and credit cards out of my husband's wallet, work out at the gym with all you men, of course, and then I'd take all you men up to the pub at the gym, buying drinks on my husband's dime, lunch on his dime, always playing the big shot. And in that lockdown facility, they told me that taking my husband's money to buy acceptance from men was really my way indirectly of buying back that acceptance I'd been so poorly robbed of from my father. So none of those actions were my fault. Later, when I came through the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous, old-timers like Clancy had a new name for that behavior, too. They called it stealing. And not only did I steal my husband's money and always play big shot on his hard work, but as a wife and a mother of 2 small children, let's just say I used to take strange men to those daytime motels. And let's just say that I did what drunken alcoholic women do in those hotels. And in that lockdown facility, they told me that my father gave me a script when I was 5 years old, that my only worth was my sexuality. And all I was doing in those hotels was really just acting out a script I'd been so poorly given in my childhood. But none of those actions in those daytime motels with those men that were not my husband were my fault. Later, when I came through the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous, old-timers like Jim over there had a new name for that, too. They called it cheating. By the time I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I am now in my 4th lockdown facility, 10 years of therapy, every medication that money can buy, to find out that I'm just a destroyed adult child because of my childhood, and none of my actions as an adult are really my fault. And for a buck in one of your baskets, this row right here said, no, kid, you're a liar, you're a cheat, you're a thief, and you're probably just an alcoholic suffering from alcoholism. And newcomers, God, I needed it to be so much more. You know, young people in Alcoholics Anonymous, there's a universal truth in these rooms that's not mentioned in this book. You don't like these old-timers, don't worry about it. You're never going to be one. You know, our old-timers are some of the most disrespected, untapped resource that I've seen in Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's a crying shame. So I come into Alcoholics Anonymous as a condition of that getting out of rehab, and I got low-cut tops, high-cut shorts, and I spent most of my time out in the parking lot flirting with you men, and I took 5 of those 30-day chips. But I'll never forget my last surrender, because I'm at a clubhouse, and I had not seen my children in 67 days because Al-Anon rightly convinced my husband, your wife has been in and out of 10 years of therapy, in and out of 4 lockdown facilities, in and out of Alcoholics Anonymous, has had the best doctors that money can buy, and she refuses to get sober. And if she drives drunk again with those kids and kills them, they told Rick he was not 50% responsible. Those Al-Anons in LA told him, you're 100% responsible if she kills those kids, because Tammy's incapable of making a sober decision for those small minor children. He tried to evict me through the courts. I created such a scene that one night he just kidnapped both our children and stole out and was raising our children in some undisclosed apartment somewhere out where I live. But I was having a really good time getting attention from the men in Alcoholics Anonymous with my low-cut tops and my little Daisy Duke shorts. So when I took my 5th 30-day chip, I didn't mention to any of you that I hadn't seen my own children in 67 days. That's 2 months and a week. I took my fifth 30-day chip, and this mean old timer, Cowboy Nick, found me right out in the parking lot, flirting with you men, and he said, you have a phone call, and I went in, and it was Rick. And he said, Tami, are you sober? And with the arrogance of an alcoholic, I said, yeah, I'm sober. In fact, I've taken another 30-day chip. He said, Tami, your son turned 5 3 weeks ago. And I was having such a good time flirting with men in Alcoholics Anonymous that I'd forgotten my son's 5th birthday. He said, Alexander is wetting the bed every night, Tami, and he's waking up with night terrors. And he said, your daughter, Chelsea, can't make it through a half a day of kindergarten without waking up in the nurse's office doubled over with a stomach ache, asking for her mom. So if you're sober, Tami, I had to sign Alex up for T-ball to take his little mind away from his troubles. And as much as I don't want to see you, woman, I think your children need to see you, at least if you're sober. And I got the directions, and I drove out to that Little League field. And my ex-husband was wearing a full team uniform with Dr. Jack, who's a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he was the assistant coach of our son's team, working the hours that he worked because I'm flirting with the men in Alcoholics Anonymous. And my little daughter was wearing this beautiful little sundress, and my little son had a batting helmet with these little baseball pants and these little cleats. And I later found out that you women from Al-Anon were going to Rick's apartment and doing my daughter's hair and helping them with their little kindergarten homework and packing their lunches because their mother was enjoying the attention that she was getting from the men in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I looked at my family, and I just walked away, and I found a guy in a big truck with a cooler of beer, and I took a beer from him. 3 days later, I woke up down in Inglewood, which is 45 minutes away from where I live. To this day, almost 23 years later, I have no recollection of what happened in those 3 days, but I'm sitting in some woman's kitchen. She's got my backpack, and she's on the phone giving Rick directions to pick me up for the last time. Rick drove out to Inglewood. He got me in the car. He handed me a manila envelope, and he said, Tami, you've been on a run for 3 days. Your mother and I were in family court this morning at 11:30 a.m. This is a restraining order that says that you cannot come near me, my medical practice, our children. I've moved back in our home of the kids or their school. And he said, your mother and I have temporary custody of your children, and you have to go. He never said another word the whole way home. He turned off the engine outside our house, and he said, Tami, you got a few minutes, just call one of your AA bimboy boyfriends to come and pick you up. And I promise you, Tam, I'll send you money every single month. But for God's sakes, just leave me and the children alone. And newcomers, I walked in that house that I had brought Chelsea and Alex home from 5 and 6 years earlier when I'd given birth to them. And I literally was void of any emotion. I was a walking dead person. I remember my body moving, and I just remember this ringing in my ears. And I got a gym bag, and I threw some sweats and some T-shirts in a gym bag. I called one of my local AA bimboys. You know, those are the guys that hang out in the parking lot and prey on newcomer women. And again, let's be fair, ladies, we got women that do that with our newcomer men. And they always found me because I was looking for them. And he told me he'd come and pick me up. And I walked out of my master bedroom, and I just said to Rick, I know I need to go, and I wanted to go. I was so tired. I was just so tired. And I said, but can I just say goodbye to Chelsea and Alex before I leave? And he said, Tami, the children are asleep. You can look in on them, but for once in your life, woman, just don't wake up your children. And newcomers, I stood outside Alex's bedroom, and I was in a hallway. And as I opened Alex's bedroom door, the hall light went right down onto my son. And I'm always so ashamed to share this, but I saw my son for the first time. And he was 5, and I saw him. And he looked so young, and he looked so beautiful. He looked just like his dad. And I remember just staring at this little living boy that had been in my life for 5 years, and I felt this love for this little kid that I have never felt in the 33 years that I had been on earth for any human being. And my heart felt warm, and I walked toward my son, and I sat on his bed, and I reeked of alcohol. I'd been on a 3-day run. And my son opened his eyes, and he started to stroke my arm. And my 5-year-old asked me a question that every therapist, my husband, my mother, all these well-meaning AAs, my son looked at me, and he said, Mommy, he goes, when are you going to come home and just be with us and not go away anymore? And in that instant, I became willing to do whatever it took. I never wanted to drink alcohol again. And new friends, I know it like I'm standing here this morning. It was not the abuse. It was not my father. It was not the divorces. Everything that was going wrong in my life was over a liquid. For God's sakes, newcomers, this is over a flippin' liquid. And if you're in this room this morning and you have grandparents or parents, a mother, a father, a husband, a wife, for God's sakes, a child that has cried, listen to me, more than 2 times over your drinking, then like me, like this book says, like Clancy and Sharon tell us, you're a selfish, self-centered human being. There is no shame in being an alcoholic. I don't want to be like this. The shame is that you got a room full of, I don't know how many 100 people here this weekend, and a book, and all these people with time that are willing to show you that you never have to hurt another person again, and you refuse to take the help. And I took the help because alcohol had finally beaten me into the willingness of surrender. And I hit my son's floor that night, and I know this sounds like some big esoteric AA story, but I did pray, and I asked God to please help me. And I have not picked up a drink yet, and it's been 22 years. Look, in my first year of sobriety, I'm one of the fortunate ones. I did receive custody back of my children through the grace of God and Al-Anon at 8 months of sobriety. At 1 year of sobriety, I went to my old-timer Nick, and I said, Nick, you know, I've got a year sober, and I'm going back to school, and I just signed up for 15 units, and he said, good a-hole, now go drop 11 of them. And he said, Tammy, you can do anything you want to do in Alcoholics Anonymous, but you have to be able to do that thing sober. And like Rick said, you can't do this thing if you don't go to meetings. And like our Al-Anon speaker, I am a regular, everyday member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I've screwed a lot of stuff up, and I've been through ups and downs in my sobriety. But the one thing that's always remained consistent, like my mentors, is I don't miss meetings, and I don't miss AA. And so I had to go back to school 4 units at a time because I was never allowed to miss a meeting or a commitment of Alcoholics Anonymous for school. It took me 18 damn years. But I was hooded for a second master's degree. I was a high school dropout, and I just received a second master's degree at 53 years old for English education. And I came in here cussing like a drunken sailor. And I teach your kids, man. I teach your grandkids. And I teach them the art of language. Go figure. I had to walk through a painful divorce at 12 years of sobriety. My Al-Anon husband made a mistake at 9 years. When I had 9 years of sobriety, he had a wife that contributed to the family income. He had a wife that didn't cuss like a drunken sailor and pass her body around town. He had a wife that took care of her children and her home. He had a wife that was committed to the fidelity of their marriage. And so he figured his problem was solved. By the time I had 12 years of sobriety, my husband came home and said, Tammy, I've met another woman in Al-Anon. She's younger than you, she's prettier than you, and she's more fun than you, and I'm leaving you for her, and I thought I was going to die. And I had fallen in love with my husband, but again, my feelings never translated to my actions, and I was so involved in AA and activity that I never really did show him how much he meant to me, and another woman made him feel like he was number one. And I remember he got this divorce attorney, and so I get a better divorce attorney, and actually that divorce attorney is at our home group, at the Pacific Group out in Los Angeles. And I just felt like sick to my stomach. I'm losing weight. And my sponsor, Nick, when I had 12 years of sobriety, my husband left me for another woman. My sponsor, Nick, died of a stroke. And my son, Alex, fell so hard to addiction that after 2 inpatient and 2 outpatient programs, I had to have him kidnapped and taken away and be locked up in Utah for a year to get him away from the drugs he's killing himself with. So at 12 and a half years sober, I lost my 3 best guys, my sponsor, my husband, and my son. And that's when I met Patrick, and all my newcomer babies are, pour you a drink. And Patrick went in my bedroom, took a dress, threw it at me, and he said, you meet me down at the local meeting. You're not the first woman that's been walked out on. You're not the first woman that's buried a beloved sponsor. And you're not the first one of us that's, raised a drug-addicted child. Now quit sucking your thumb and come to a meeting and honor your mentor and your old-timer by doing what he taught you to do. And I fell in love. And I remember during this time, after my sponsor died, I was sponsorless, and I just randomly called Clancy. And I said, Clancy, I'm going through this divorce, and he's got this attorney, and I've got another attorney. And he said, Tammy, what are you going after? And I said, well, the attorney tells me that I'm going after spousal support. He said, really? What spousal support? And I said, well, that's where you're married to a really rich doctor for 21 years, and then he leaves you for another woman, and then you're entitled to a whole bunch of money every month for the half-life of the marriage, 11 years, and half of his entire medical practice, which was worth $3 million a year, because he opened it while we were married. And Clancy said, Tami, spousal support's about putting someone back on their feet again. He put up with your drinking. He put up with your sobriety. He afforded you an opportunity to go back to school so you could become self-supporting through your own contributions. You're not a goddamn doctor, so what do you want with a medical practice? So why don't you just go ask him what he wants? And I went and asked Rick what he wants, and he said, Tami, I just want my new girlfriend, and I want my medical practice. And he said, what do you want? And I said, I just want my house, and I want to keep the kids in their bedrooms in their school with their dogs. And no money changed hands. And we called off the attorneys, and our entire divorce was done for $3,500, and there was a lot of property. He was a surgeon, and I was a teacher. There have been many, many days that I have regretted that call to Clancy. But I can tell you that I've never had a sleepless night. My ex-husband nearly died in 2013. I got a call from my daughter, and by the way, that woman he left me with took him for every penny he had. It turns out that I have a compulsion for alcohol, and my ex-husband has a compulsion for alcoholic women. And she was not an Al-Anon, she was an alcoholic, and a vindictive one. And I was his friend through all of that. In 2013, he collapsed during a surgery, and he went home because he had 3 days off, thinking he was passing a kidney stone. And 4 days later, they found him unconscious on the floor in multiple organ failure. It turns out that he does have the effects of Agent Orange from when he served in Vietnam. They called my daughter, and Patrick and I and the two kids drove up to where he was, and they told us that he was on life support, that he is not viable with life. There's no way he would live, but they were just keeping him alive long enough so that the children could say goodbye to their father. And I want you to know that when I walked in that intensive care unit, the kids one by one said goodbye, and my daughter was so sad because she just said, Daddy, nobody was supposed to walk me down the aisle but you. And they said goodbye to their father. And then I asked the doctors if I could just stay with him till he passed. I didn't want him to be alone. And because he was a surgeon on staff, they allowed that. And I want to let you know, when I looked at my ex-husband, I felt this love for this man, and I thanked him for saving me in every way that a woman could be saved. And I realized that his only crime was that he loved me. And I had come to the place in Alcoholics Anonymous where I loved him back. Rick did not die that night. He did not die a week later. 15 days later, they took him off of life support, and he began to breathe on his own. 4.5 months later, they called Patrick and I, and they said he's viable with life, but he will never walk or talk again, and you need to put him in a boarding care facility until the good Lord takes him. And I called Clancy, and I said, Clancy, what do I do? And with that love and that depth and that compassion, he goes, God damn it, quit being a professional mourner. Go back to work. Find him a place to stay. This is in God's hands. And I remember I heard him say pray, and I just said a prayer. I came home from work that day, and Patrick, who's in construction, had all his construction trucks in our cul-de-sac. He gutted our whole downstairs. We got a $6,000 hospital bed. We hired full-time nurses. We had pulleys and showers and all that. And to make a long story short, this past January, my ex-husband walked my daughter down the aisle and gave a speech at her wedding. And that's what recovery looks like in Alcoholics Anonymous and Al-Anon. My ex-husband's still with us, and it's 2015. And you know what? I'm so grateful to be able to make those amends. He's got himself a new little girlfriend. She is not an alcoholic, and he's back in Al-Anon. I'm going to end in sharing that, and I'm really going to end. This January, my son received a horrible, horrible diagnosis. And I've had a lot of things that have broken my heart in sobriety, but this one brought me to my knees. There is no cure, and his future is not an optimistic one. He also has a 5-month-old baby. So I'm going to be honest with you, this is only the 3rd time I've spoken in several months, because my son has been so ill that we've been wrapped around the clock just trying to keep him stable. And one more time, my sponsor, Clancy, said, don't you dare let his diagnosis define you. And I'm here today to tell you that through the grace of God and the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I am completely powerless over Alex's diagnosis. But I can tell you one thing, sir. I'm going to be the best sober mom that I can be with a son that is diagnosed with one of the most severe mental illnesses. And I was so angry. I've got to raise this 6-month-old kid, and I got this sick kid, and my whole life turned on a dime. And you know what? I don't know, after listening to you, Al-Anon speakers, maybe I got sober 22 years ago so I could be there for my son and for that kid. And I'm good. I'm okay. I'm optimistic, and I am hopeful for my future, for his future, and for the future of Alcoholics Anonymous. I thank God for AA. I thank AA for God. Clancy, thank you for being at the helm, and I thank all of you. Thanks.